Hey, it's Jeremy from Firehouse Labs with another StationOne release update video, this time version 0.18.0. Unfortunately, 0.18 doesn't have a lot of exciting new features added, particularly for end users. We did have to focus a fair bit of attention in this particular release in doing some framework and core backend updates to the platform, just to ensure that we maintain all of the latest security and necessary updates to keep the platform operating as it should, and make sure that it's as secure as it should. So that took a few days. We have still managed to get some minor features in and also some minor changes, again, based on our user feedback. So the first thing that we've added, just to try and make things a little bit easier for brigades in terms of managing their members, is added some dietary requirement fields to member profiles. So you can see now we've got allergies and dietary requirements. You can also export these specifically. So if we look at the export function here, we can do a full contact list export as a CSV with all of your members' details, or we can just do a allergy and dietary requirement export. So this was something that was requested by brigades. Obviously, if there's any catering or away strike team stuff where this is important information, rather than having to ask people all the time, we can capture that once and then ensure that that information is provided as necessary. We've also included some minimum and maximum attendees parameters on our events. So you can see this one here that I was using for testing has minimum of 2. And then we've put a maximum of 6, and we've overridden that just in this test case to make sure that everything works. So basically, if you're taking a single vehicle somewhere and you've only got a limited number of seats, you can now cap that event to ensure that all the seats are filled. People will go onto a waiting list if they're over the capacity. So if you fill up all 5 seats and 7 people respond, it will actually show you a waiting list section in here. And then from that, you're able to either take more people if you want to and give them a place and they'll be notified, or obviously just take the full complement. If someone cancels out, then someone from the waiting list will move up into that position as well. So just wrap that over the top. It's an optional field when you create a new event. So there is the optional fields in here for your minimum and maximum number of people responding to that event. And they obviously don't know when they're responding to that. If the person who responds over the threshold, they'll get notified that the event's full and they've been added to the wait list. So we just make sure that that communication loop is closed there as well for those members. With regards to equipment, we've made a couple of changes in here, most specifically around external servicing. So if you do have equipment that has routine external servicing by a service agent, we're now able to capture that back against the piece of equipment. So you can see this particular chainsaw here has third-party servicing enabled. With the next service being due on the 20th of the 5th, 27, it gets serviced every 12 months. We've got a vendor here. We also provide the past service history here as well. So you can see that that has been actioned. When we add the servicing options to our equipment, so we'll just go back to one that doesn't have servicing enabled on it. We might have to just use this one for an example. So there's some extra fields in here now. So we've got the third-party service toggle. So if we put that on, we can pop in our next service date. So we can, say that this is going to be in, January 2027. We're going to set that at 12. So you've got the action reminder here. So basically the platform will generate a action automatically to remind you that the equipment is due for servicing, so you can go about that process. So we can pop in here, we only want that 5 days before or something, and then we can put in our our preferred provider and any last service date. So we can say that that was today. We can update that, so you can see obviously now all of that is captured back against this piece of equipment, and then 5 days prior to that next service date, that will appear as an action within the platform. So you'll be able to go about doing what you need to do with that. We've also just added a tab here for upcoming service, so you can see your items that have their servicing scheduled, and they're in obviously chronological order based on the next piece of equipment that will be coming back through for that. We've also backed that up with an equipment servicing report as well, just for visibility. So you can see, basically if you're meeting your targets with regards to that small equipment servicing and any overdue or, due in the next 30 days and things like that. So there's an extra report there for that. Into our library, down to our library. We've added the ability to tag articles. If you have a look here, you can see there's a tag on this one of SOP. So if we edit our article that's here, basically we can start adding, put them in here. So we can basically start tagging these articles. And what will happen based on those tags is that we'll start recommending related articles. So if you've got, in your training section, for example, this one's, training, drill, grass and scrub. So if you created more articles and tagged them as grass and scrub, obviously they would appear grouped together. We've also replicated that functionality into the library for our public members. So you can see the tags are appearing here, and they can also filter by the tag in the library by clicking on the relevant tag that's there. We've also added the search feature as well, and likewise, if we've made some minor modifications to the way that the interface appears, basically. So some mobile issues with regards to layouts and buttons and things like that. So we've addressed all of those issues in here as well. We have updated our actions, particularly for an action type of vehicle, to be able to now mark the vehicle out of service or the piece of equipment out of service. So obviously if the issue that has arisen as a result of the inspection is critical enough, rather than having to now perform 2 or 3 actions, we can directly mark that vehicle out of service from that action. And likewise, with our action system, basically once that action is resolved, the vehicle will automatically be put back into service. Likewise, if you put the vehicle back into service from the vehicle, in that scenario, it will automatically close out the action there for you as well. So added that specifically appears for the vehicle type actions. We've made some background updates to actions and notification handlers and things like that. There are a few issues that were arising as a result of that. We've added recurring schedules for actions, so you can basically, if you have an action that happens every year or every month or something like that, you can now set them as recurring in the system, and they will automatically start appearing. And you can obviously see the recent history here for this one that's been closed out. So again, something that was requested to have those recurring actions be configurable in the platform. We've also updated the create action form now to allow you to override the reported by. So if someone verbally tells you or calls you and says, hey, this is not working, we can actually attribute that action to them as the reporter during that process. So we can come in and change our reported by. We can also do that on any of these actions here. So we can edit the action now, and we can change the reported by field as well. So again, that was something that had been requested, particularly in the case where you're raising actions on behalf of your members. Finally, with things that we've added, we have added a cancellation workflow to active training sessions now. So you would note that prior to this change, there was just a hard delete option. So you would just delete the training session and there would be no notification. So we have now implemented the ability to cancel with reason those training sessions. So you can see that the reason is appearing here, and it will notify anyone who is registered for that training. So anyone who's noted as attending or awaiting response will be notified of that cancellation of that training event. Once it gets into a cancelled state, the same as events, you can then go and delete that permanently. We've made sure by updating all of the reporting that obviously cancelled events don't appear in any reports and things like that. So all of that has been tended to, but now you can go through a proper cancellation workflow for any training sessions that you make in the platform. Aside from that, we've done a few minor changes, largely around vehicles. There was some odd behaviour that was occurring with regards to the status and the bookings. So we've changed the text here and we've made the statuses a bit clearer, particularly when a vehicle goes out of service for a particular reason. So this was getting a little bit confusing in the way that this would behave. So the vehicle now goes offline. Bookings are still open because you can obviously book for a period after the vehicle is out of service. And likewise, if we're loaning the vehicle or something like that, we're also doing the same thing and toggling those statuses, to be correct. So the vehicle is obviously active, bookings are still active, but there was some little bit of confusion around the way that some of those would behave. We have exposed the action item ID as well, which was requested. So you can refer to these by number. So you can see, 68, 63, 62 appearing there. And likewise, the ID number is here when you come into those actions as well. So some people had just asked it would be easier if we could refer to them by number, which is fine. We've changed the view of the PPC allocation. So this now defaults to a table. And you can see basically counts of allocated, cleaning, repair, lost, etc. And then you can obviously drill down into that member and see all of their allocated stuff that's there. In brigade settings, which some are aware of, we did hotfix directly into production, an additional security parameter to allow validation of your members. So basically, when they select their name when opening the station portal, they would go through a validation workflow whereby they would receive an email that they could open the link from, and that would actually validate them and save a secure token. This is optional, so you can turn this off if you don't want that. And likewise, obviously, the PIN part still exists there as well. So a few changes that are in there, and then basically a bunch of bug fixes and various other things, some security patches. As I said, a significant portion of this release focused around updating the core framework and the back end of the platform. So next week we'll be back into feature development mode for the next release. At this stage, most likely looking at implementing the asset manager to work in partnership with the equipment. That's been something that's quite highly requested, to be able to capture all of that additional equipment that's at your units. In terms of batteries and computers and all of that kind of stuff, basically a digital asset record and getting away from those spreadsheets and those kind of things. So that's most likely what we're looking at in the next release. But obviously this version 0.18 is now available, and we'll get started straight away on the next one. So we'll see you in a week's time.